In these unique times, there are quite a few possibilities and opportunities for affecting positive change in our schools and our communities. As in this global crisis and a pandemic, our homes have become schools. So prior to going over my research projects, I wanted to give a little background and context to the life of the author in this study. And start off with some of the current research projects from March 2020 to the present. Obviously, I have the job of teaching my own children in my home. So what I have to consider is what will motivate, educate, enrich, and inspire 12 and 14-year-old boys during a global crisis. Throughout this past month, I have started the School of Jack Hoa, which is the School of Jack and Noah, complete with academics, social emotional learning, physical and mental challenges such as 24 hours on a trampoline, and the development of the principles of the guiding minds, which, if you look closely, involves thinking like Yoda. As a reflective process, this daily schedule is continually redesigned, redeveloped, and we reflect upon it at our school. Although a puppy is not a student, I also have to figure out how to motivate a 3-year-old female puppy who now refuses to walk unless it is a social event with 2 or more people. In addition to the home, I also have to figure out school-wide in what way we can honor and celebrate our 5th and 8th graders at Avison. Now, my son is in 5th grade and my other son's in 8th grade. This is their rite of passage trip year. This is the year where they have culmination. I also teach at the school they go to. So in an effort to affect positive school-wide change, I developed a school-wide survey requesting feedback from the community, from the parents, and hopefully getting volunteer support and ideas so that we can all come together and create a memorable opportunity for our children in these unique times. This survey ended up going out. A copy of the survey was made for 8th and for 12th grade so that we can figure this out. As a summer camp director, I am also doing some research on how I can offer a meaningful and virtual program for kids from kinder to college level. We are developing a curriculum based on the theme, resilience, which, believe it or not, we had as a theme prior to the pandemic. I've also sent out a survey here for Peace Camp families and the Peace Camp community to figure out what is possible for a virtual Peace Camp in 2020, as well as developing a leadership training program. In addition to all of that, I'm trying to think on a grander scale, and I am part of a workshop at the Center at the California Association for the Education of Young Children, in which we are also doing a workshop on resilience. And we have now shifted to a possible virtual workshop, and we are trying to come up with ways that we can support educators, particularly educators of young children, when they return back to the classroom. And some of the ways we're going to support them is by researching and developing recommended book lists and reading prompts for children's books written on the theme of resilience, researching and developing a toolbox for early childhood educators with practical resources to support the reentry to the classroom after the pandemic. And one goal that I have is to write a children's book that will help children with understanding of resilience. And of course, we are all coming up with how we can prioritize our own spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical health while handling all of these projects during a pandemic. So on my spare time, because I feel like social and emotional learning and taking care of self, putting the oxygen mask on oneself first, is key to helping others. I have registered for the Science of Wellbeing and am midway through that course, which is offered through Yale University, to try to come to terms with how we stay well for myself, my family, my community, and the schools I'm a part of. Some of the things that I'm doing. In addition, I have something that I do not tend to put as a top value, which is how I prioritize my financial well-being while also supporting positive changes in my community during a global crisis. Before the pandemic, I was going to look for a new job and make a living and try to make a living wage for myself. So with that being said, I have to complete my coursework for the Masters of Teaching. Know that this is not exactly what I would have accomplished had there not have been a pandemic. I am choosing passion and purpose over perfectionism and thinking outside the box for this particular project. Some patterns and trends in all of this work that I'm doing is that when spiritual and physical well-being are prioritized, all other areas seem to fall into place. And that will transfer somewhat into the research project and into the class as well, and into an exploration of tuning into Yoda as well. Surrendering to all that there is, because that is all that there is, in every given moment. Embracing challenge, realizing that there are gifts of gratitude, there are gifts in the challenges, there are gifts in the conflicts if you just surrender to it. And humor, even with all the tough stuff, brings joy to all. And Yoda has all the answers. So with that being said, my project is about program perspective and distance learning, and will the 3rd to 5th grade Avison Center for Independent Studies distance learning students program effectively meet the needs of the community that it serves. I have developed an introduction here, which I will send the link for. There are some key points here. The study involves my class, 1/3 to 5th grade class in the Avison Center for Independent Studies hybrid homeschool program, in which the students have the option of coming to campus for 2 full-day campus days, and most attend. So we had to develop and implement alternative virtual programs to replace these 2 full-day campus programs. And although we predicted that social and emotional learning was the top value for our families in our program, the research findings really helped narrow our focus and provide insight into what tools, methods, and practices work best for our students. Essentially, this is an ongoing study as the needs of the community change. Not only do they change at this stage, they've changed almost overnight sometimes. So we have to continue a study like this and be reflective in our practice. This is a flawed study due to bias and a pandemic, and there are details of some of the biases and the validity in the reading. Our hypotheses were essentially that ACIS, our families do value virtual live classroom experiences. Our full-time program did not require teachers to offer virtual classes for their children. So my own children do not get that experience. Although we're affiliated with the school, we are our own program, and we decided that was important for our families. And I think we found that that is the case, as you'll see in the research. We also thought that ACIS families value social and emotional learning above all else. We narrowed our focus because essentially for our campus days, our students were exposed to to opportunities to innovate, to create STEAM engineering projects. They had writing class, they had culinary arts class, they had math projects. They had a lot of different kinds of opportunities, physical education. What we decided to do is to try to figure out what to make the most use out of our 2 one-hour sessions together that in our virtual online classrooms. And we felt that we should narrow in on community bonding, social emotional learning, peer interaction. And the third is that ACIS families will be satisfied. So my hypothesis was that our families would be satisfied with our distance learning program. Ultimately, our families were satisfied prior to this pandemic. So keeping that satisfaction is going to be easier if there's trust with the school and community. In place of a literature review, I took a look at virtual learning possibilities, and I have a further rationale, but essentially that a global and local crisis lead to different research techniques. My key points in my rationale is that the unprecedented nature of a global crisis eliminates the purpose of a literature review, being that the purpose of a literature review is to determine what has already been done that relates to the topic, and these are unprecedented times. There's not much to look at in those terms. And also that a global shift in values and needs. While the purpose of action research is to affect positive change, in a global crisis of this nature, teacher researchers need to be in action, constantly evaluating and reevaluating the needs of their community, reflecting constantly, and redeveloping and implementing new ideas. So there is, although documentation is crucial and vital and important, the needs are so big right now that action sort of supersedes some of these things. Some of the technological tools that I took a look at to support virtual student engagement was Zoom, Nearpod, Google Tools, and Flipgrid. The research involved webinars, trial and error, student and parent feedback. With the live Zoom classroom, I tried out the collaborative whiteboard and collaborative art, Zoom rooms, individual school email accounts, and which provide access to Google Docs for all kids. Some things that we discovered is that 85% of my students who attended the campus programs have also attended the virtual classroom. So that shows a level of interest. Some options that we used were and I apparently put in a quote that feedback from a student that, Miss Laura, you're going to miss the mute button when we go back to school. Apparently that was just a little humor put in, not necessarily feedback. Okay, some Google tools that I have used as a collaborative Google slideshow, Google Jamboard, and one thing to note is in doing this work, I have learned to update my own technological skills. 50%, an interesting thing to note with some of these Google tools is only 50% of my students created this optional slide to share with their peers, in part because the work was optional, and it wasn't done, in part I think because the work wasn't done as part of a live classroom, but done after the class was over. I think the reason why there were 50% of the students that ended up completing it eventually is because when they did complete it, they were given time to share it in the classroom. So that proved to be motivating for at least half of the kids. In terms of Google Jamboard, 0% of the students added to Google Jamboard. It was also an optional thing. We provided email accounts for students, and 14% of the students created email accounts. One thing that we are learning is that, especially because we're a hybrid homeschool program, very different strokes for different folks, and people will make their choices because things are optional. I also looked at Nearpod. Nearpod can combine with Zoom and offer opportunities for virtual live lessons. It also provides opportunities for STEAM, social, emotional learning, and other academic areas. Students can engage in authentic ways with polls, quizzes, prompts. The teacher is not reinventing the wheel as the virtual lessons are provided. It is very difficult to gauge feedback, however. So when we did this motion and energy skate park lesson, I thought it was a failure, and did not feel like I got verbal feedback or a lot of participation from the kids, only to find out in an informal discussion later that at least 2 of my children really liked the lesson. It was just that they were so involved in the interactive simulation that they weren't providing the verbal feedback, and I wasn't able to notice the nonverbal being with the amount of screens up at any given time. The lesson flaws are that there are